So my name is Phil Swan. I'm Director for GMCA Digital at Greater Manchester Combined Authority. I'm going to do just about 10 minutes or so just to provide a bit of context and scene setting before handing over to some of my colleagues. And great to have so many people here today. So thanks for the opportunity to chat and talk a bit about some of what we're doing, what some of our plans are, where we're going, but how we're working and how I guess we want to continue to work with the sector as we move forward. So if I could just kicking off, I mean, it doesn't matter if you look at the OECD data, EU data, McKinsey, take your almost your pick of research organisations. The last 18 months, as we all know, have accelerated a massive shift, both in the UK and internationally, to a much more digitised society, and we're all looking to respond to that. I think one of the interesting things in that as well is that it feels like we're at an accelerating point as well, and there is increasing talk about by 2025 being an increasingly ubiquitous tele-everything world. And one of the things we reflect on quite significantly is, as services shift from analog to digital, there isn't a gentle tail off in analog services. They just drop off off a cliff at a point when they no longer become viable. Look at banks on the high street and channel shift, and how that's precipitated some quite rapid moves over recent times. So what does that mean for our wider society, and how do we respond to that? I mean, even just looking at our own organisation, and we're just pulling out some of the stats the other day, between Jan and March this year, the Combined Authority hosted over 24,000 participatory meetings and combinations of meetings and individuals, with over 4.4 million minutes of collective audio time. I mean, prior to the pandemic, that was it's just almost unthinkable. But now it's almost the new norm, and we're working through hybrid ways of working and what that means and what the future is and so on. And if I look also at the sort of 400 non-fire and rescue staff in the Combined Authority, so there's about 2,400 staff in Greater Manchester Combined Authority, about 400 of which are non-fire and rescue. And if you look at actually how much travel they've avoided doing to and from work on their commute over the last 18 months, it's more than the distance to the moon and back. It's huge. It's about 500,000 miles collectively. In fact, it's slightly more than that. So it's enormous, and actually that has big implications for carbon neutrality and how we work and how we live, and how we're all that transition shift, which is so much in the press at the moment, and at the forefront of so many people's minds. But underpinning that is digital capability. I think if you look at digital within the context of place shaping, which is increasingly a focus of ours, our high streets have just been reshaped, aren't they? It's the sort of perfect storm of channel shift and pandemic. One of McKinsey's report recently showed about a 30% shift to online in food and household categories. Massive implications for our high streets, and we will all be seeing and feeling that at the moment. Online travel. You practically require a degree in digital literacy to go overseas at the moment. My dad recently went overseas, and he's not the most digitally literate person on the planet, I could say, and trying to navigate his way through the NHS app so he could travel in a place which doesn't have a mobile signal, so he couldn't get a verification code, even if he knew what a verification code was. So the challenges around digital literacy are just enormous. And as ever, the privacy debate rages on. But still, more than 60 million people signed up to Facebook in the last quarter of 21. So that kind of concept of tele-everything and the shift to much more embedded and pervasive digitization of society is just so front and central. And what that means for our society, and particularly for those that are not comfortable with that journey, is enormous. If you look at the job opportunities, and some really interesting statistics out today, I'm sure many of you will have listened to on Radio 4 this morning, about the economy, about the unfilled roles and so on, and how rapidly the economy has bounced back. One of the things that's worth bearing in mind is that the creative, digital and tech economy is growing about 5 times faster than the mainstream economy, or it was pre-pandemic, and there's no indication that that's changed. So what does that mean in terms of the career opportunities, job switches, career switches, not just obviously across Greater Manchester, but across the whole of the UK. It is massive. The pace of change is massive and will continue to be, but a huge number of our people are not comfortable with it. And of course, that brings us back very squarely into how does the public sector respond to this, and what's the role of the public sector to enable society, the most vulnerable in society in particular, to respond and to feel as if they are not being left behind. And that isn't that's not a bolt-on activity. That has to be mainstreamed. And Bina's going to talk a bit about digital inclusion, and John will talk about some of the digital transformation work we're doing in investment in infrastructure and capability. But frankly, it's got to sit across everything. It has to, and that's conversations we're having very actively in the Combined Authority. We had our Digital Inclusion Action Network meeting yesterday, which the Mayor chairs. We've got our Reform Board, a 2-hour session on Friday, which the Mayor again is chairing, focused specifically on how we mainstream digital inclusion within reform activity. So it's just incredibly relevant in context. Our overall strategy for this has not really changed in terms of, our overall digital approach in Greater Manchester has not changed through the pandemic, but it has shifted the emphasis. And we published it, as many of you will have seen, I think called the GM Digital Blueprint in February 2020. And that's our roadmap. Contains our North Star. North Star is where we're going, our objectives, what we're trying to do across growth, across skills, across empowering people, innovation, and so on. And there is absolutely shifts within that. We're focusing more on empowering people for all the reasons I've just given, but exploiting data and technology is absolutely at the forefront in joined up ways, in collaborative ways, leveling up, working together, and so on. And that document was never a technology document. It was always about people, and coming back to the people at the heart of public services and people at the heart of our approach and strategy. It's always been focused on people. We are not interested in technologies for technology's sake. The targets are school readiness, homelessness, inclusion, skills, and so on. Life opportunities, the best place to grow up, get on, and grow old. And it's how those things are blended together with the technologies and opportunities is our focus and my team's focus, to make sure that we're delivering as effectively as we can be across the city region. And one of the things that I think we do well and we focus on a lot, and it'll come through in the talks that are coming as well, is the huge focus we have on collaboration. The Combined Authority was created to do things that the boroughs individually couldn't do themselves. And if they can do it themselves, the general model is that they do it themselves. Where we work and where the Combined Authority comes together is those things that ideally we all need to do or must do or are best done together. And some of the things we're trying to do at scale across the city regions are undoubtedly things that wouldn't work for individual organisations to try and do themselves. And that's the sweet spot. That's the best place for the CA to be acting, which inevitably means big, complex, collaborative pieces of work. But we have got a legacy of collaboration. For those who know, there used to be a Greater Manchester Council that was abolished in, I think, 1985, and straight on the back of that decision by Margaret Thatcher, a thing called AGMA, the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities, was set up. And that has been the basis of collaboration across the 10 boroughs in Greater Manchester since then. And the Combined Authority really is the kind of culmination of years and years, 30 years of collaboration. So the relationships and the way we work are quite. So I think, just to wrap up my piece here, I think it's fair to say our digital landscape is, we'll all agree with this, has fundamentally changed, is really changing. My asks here in particular for this group is, I think we are ourselves changing the way in which we partner with technology organisations, how we think about innovation, how we explore new opportunities to be more savvy and get better outcomes, because the pace of change and the pace of opportunity through technology is just accelerating, but the resources we've got are very limited. And as you all know, many people across the public sector are pretty battered by the pandemic, but we still need to maintain that pace, and we need to be looking forward to those opportunities. So I think one of the things we're keen to do is understand how we can work with the sector better, with techUK, with colleagues on the call here today. We already work very closely with a number of technology companies, and I think there's a real opportunity for us to do more around that. And I think the local digital capital work that techUK has really flagged some of this as well, which has given us some real food for thought. But it is an incredibly exciting time. I'm very fortunate to have a fantastic team around me as we work on a number of these challenges. And as I say, we're very fortunate in that we work in a broader ecosystem of fantastic companies, local authorities, academia, central government departments and others. So it is an incredibly exciting time. It's an incredibly challenging time, but we're looking ahead and we're quite excited about the road ahead. So Georgina, I'll hand back to you at that point if that's okay.
Excellent. Thanks for that, Phil. Lots there, as well as some massive and big questions that I'm sure we could explore in further follow-up sessions. Thank you for that. And now we'll hand over to Bina Bora, who I believe will be presenting on the work you've been doing around digital inclusion. And I myself have signed up to your Digital Inclusion Taskforce, so I know there's lots of great stuff going up on there, and I know some of our members are actively involved. So over to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Georgina, and thanks, Phil, for the introduction. I think just a testament that we're all here from different cities with the ability to choose our own biscuits is showing us, the pace of digital change, but what the world of work looks like now. And certainly some of the things that Phil has picked up in terms of speed. We've seen speed as never before with multiple impacts. The speed of which you've had to make decisions have changed. The speed of which you've had to get things to market have changed. The speed of change has changed. So just in the past 18 months alone, some of those ambitions for Greater Manchester in terms of our digital ambitions has really brought to the forefront the real meaning behind being a world-class leading city region. And I just wanted to pick up on some of that when we talk about some of our main priorities, such as empowering people and digitally enabling all businesses. So if you don't mind, I will just share a slide deck really quickly. Great, I'm hoping that you can see this.
Yes, we can see that, thank you.
Perfect. Okay, so I will be joined by my colleague Chris in a couple of minutes. But basically, I would like to talk about how we're in Greater Manchester fixing the digital divide. And certainly, as we've said, over the past 18 months, whilst digital transformation has accelerated years worth of plans in a matter of days and weeks, and we've certainly seen the impact of some of that pace of change in terms of inequalities that existed pre-pandemic, but essentially the digital divide. So as we've seen, and I suppose I can talk about the digital divide and digital inclusion for quite some time, but I know colleagues here have got an understanding of what digital inclusion is, and therefore I can send this slide deck post-meeting. But as we've seen globally and nationally, the pandemic has really highlighted some of those inequalities that existed before the pandemic, including digital inclusion or digital exclusion. And the impact of digital exclusion on particularly in vulnerable groups. The pandemic has really highlighted the difference between the haves and the have-nots. And we've certainly seen the impact for those that did not have digital access and have not been able to access services and vital services and information as we've seen it all go online. We've seen a huge increase on digital marginalisation facing the poorest, most vulnerable communities. And I've got to say, in the past 18 months, our understanding of empowering people and the role that digital exclusion played has really been, has really shifted. Our understanding of digital exclusion has changed. We understood that measures and stats that existed before the pandemic in terms of the extent of digital exclusion has really been challenged in terms of what we had seen during the pandemic. And therefore our understanding of digital inclusion has changed, but also the questions around who are digitally excluded, as well as the extent of those invisible gaps in Greater Manchester has had to be questioned. So I would just add, whilst the government was supporting people that were vulnerable, we were seeing a new level of vulnerability in terms of people that were facing the digital divide. So whilst people that were medically vulnerable were being supported during the pandemic, there were other levels of vulnerability coming to the fore, and we saw that in schools with young people that were unable to continue their education because they weren't able to access devices or connectivity to access their learning remotely. We heard stories of teachers that were having to give papers to their students after school because those students were not able to access learning resources. But beyond that, it's not just about the connection to education, it's about the connection to support. So for many young people, the impact that we saw, and part of our commitment for young people in Greater Manchester, the impact was more on well-being, on a feeling of being left behind, and it goes without saying we are going to see some of those impacts for months and years to come. Digital inclusion, there's a huge impact on poverty, and people that are facing poverty are facing levels of digital exclusion and more likely to face levels of digital exclusion. We know that age is an indicator, but it's not the full picture. Now, we saw this at the start of the pandemic with other local authorities struggling to get online, but within days, people who had previously avoided using Zoom or Teams were able to run meetings themselves naturally. So we've seen motivation certainly change over the past 18 months. A report that was launched by Professor Simeon Yates in September last year really spoke to us in terms of the challenges that we were seeing and the scale of the challenges that we were seeing. We know from that report that 1.2 million residents in Greater Manchester are facing exclusion in some way. That's 41% of our population. So that's quite a striking figure, and it really brought to the fore what we were seeing in terms of digital inequalities in the region. We knew that we had specific challenges in Greater Manchester. Pre-pandemic, we had some of the highest levels of poverty in the UK and some of the highest levels of unemployment in the UK. So whilst we absolutely have the biggest digital cluster and tech cluster outside of London, and world-class ambitions to be a leading digital city region, and absolutely we have the foundations in infrastructure and the strength of our cluster in order to achieve that. We can't possibly look at being world leading without addressing some of those inequalities, and as Phil said, this is about how we empower our people and businesses to thrive. We understand the impacts of digital exclusion leads to other inequalities, and we very much look at digital exclusion as a facet of broader social exclusion. People that are digitally excluded are actually paying more for utilities because they don't have the capacity to compare prices online. So we look at digital exclusion and digital inclusion as a basic human right, and connectivity as a basic utility. And that is our approach that we're seeing, that we're using in Greater Manchester. It goes without saying there is an immense amount of work that is going on, not just regionally, but nationally. But even still, we've seen the gaps. So once the government was putting out support in January with the closure of schools, we understood that up to 15 to 20,000 young people in Greater Manchester were still estimated to be left behind without the means to continue their education remotely. So when we talk about inequalities, and digital exclusion is a really complex beast, as we know the reasons why people are excluded or facing levels of digital exclusion have got lots of different contributing factors. I won't go into them here, but this is what we're talking about in terms of the impacts. It is about access to care and support, access to education and opportunity. It's about access to society. And we believe that everyone should have the equal ability to fully participate in society, democracy and economy. And we also understand that for particular groups, they are even further away from being able to do so. So before I move on to my colleague, I will just say, yes, we understand that digital exclusion is a real and evolving beast. As we've seen, the pace of technological change will always be changing, and it's hard to keep up. For many, it will be a widening divide. And the issue, as we've seen pre-pandemic, is that digital inclusion is everyone's problem, but no one is owning it. So it comes down to what are our levers, and there's an immense amount of work being done in Greater Manchester. There's an immense amount of work being done nationally, and this is back to Phil's point. This is about how we join up better. How can we make effective joints to have real, meaningful impact and drive sustainable change? And as we've seen in the past 18 months, it was a necessary journey to have an emergency response to support young people, and we set up a tech fund as a response to that and helped schools across our 10 boroughs in Greater Manchester. Over 3,000 young people in Greater Manchester were supported, but it's just a drop in the ocean. So really, this is a call out to colleagues here in terms of, yes, it's a huge and unwieldy problem, but you know, a challenge of this magnitude really requires a whole system effort and response. And we've done that in Greater Manchester with launching our agenda for change. We've launched a task force, which is 150 strong cross-sector task force, because we understand, you know, we need to join up across other sectors to address some of those barriers to digital exclusion. That's 150 people that are committed to addressing digital inclusion that might have a global or national presence, but a footprint in Greater Manchester. And we understand that together we can make an impact more than the sum of our parts. So I'll just leave it there and introduce my colleague, Chris.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Pope. I'm working in the GMCA research team, and I support Bina and the rest of the team with some research asks and support around digital inclusion, the digital agenda more generally, but I also manage things like mapping GM, if anyone's ever used that, and I also partly work on the open data agenda as well. So how can we use open data to support businesses like yourselves? Well, on the digital inclusion agenda, I think the main thing is that there's a lot we know, but we also know that there's a lot we don't know. It's very Rumsfeldian information theory, you know, those known unknowns. And what we want to get to is a state where we can adequately support the local authorities and community companies, community interest companies, charities, the faith sector to really help support individuals at a very local level. And as Phil pointed out before, a lot of the work that Greater Manchester does is at that city regional level. It's there to provide foundations, it's there to provide connections between organisations and projects, and it's there to be that additional support to do those things that local authorities either can't or don't have the resources to do. And in that respect, that's what we try to do with the research side, trying to provide that foundational base of evidence for the work that's going on, and try to provide a bit of additional contextual information to support local organisations to deliver better for people in Greater Manchester. Now, some of the questions that we kind of face come from the fact that there is no single data set that says this person's digitally included and this person is digitally excluded. There's no single database that's consistent across everywhere in the country that allows us to kind of to apply that and to use it and to be able to target resources. So what we have to do is we have to look at some of the factors around digital exclusion, digital inclusion, and we try to map some of those factors and try to understand where in Greater Manchester especially digital exclusion is more likely. Sorry, I'm going to have to do a Chris Whitty with you here, Bina. Could I have next slide, please? Thank you very much. So some of the work that we've done is around the Digital Exclusion Risk Index, so trying to map those factors. And we see the benefit of creating the Digital Exclusion Risk Index because it shows at a hyper-local level where is more likely to be digitally excluded. But it also does it for everywhere in England, Scotland and Wales. So we've taken the kind of the open data, we've taken information from ONS, from Ofcom, from others to try to identify what are the kind of factors that are most likely associated with digital exclusion. So there's a little kind of diagram of it there. I'll put the link to the tool in the chat and we'll kind of do a bit of a bigger launch of the tool kind of later in October and Digitober. We also need to know what's going on in Greater Manchester, who's delivering what, where, and for whom. And the reason for that is if we don't know, there's a chance that we could think, hey, there's something missing here. We need to put in a great big program, and we end up displacing a mass of work that's kind of going on at a very, very local level. And that's not what we want to do. We want to be able to support local authorities, local areas to deliver better. And so we're going through a process of system mapping. I think this is where it'd be really useful for organisations involved here to help contribute to that. We're trying to understand some of the places, the organisations and the projects where digital inclusion support is being delivered. And once we've done that, we've got a better idea of some of the gaps and the opportunities for Greater Manchester to invest our time, our effort, our capacity, our resources in something that's going to provide a foundational base for digital inclusion support in Greater Manchester and connectivity between some of those projects as well. Can I go next slide, please? Thank you very much, Rita. Thanks a lot. And the other thing that we need to do is we need to provide the research and support to build that framework, to build that digital inclusion ecosystem. And I just realised how public sector-y I sound when I say that, but it's about everyone together. It's about public sector, it's about the private sector, it's about the third sector, the faith sector, all coming together with potentially slightly different aims, but with one goal in the end of getting people online, supporting them so that they aren't digitally excluded, so that they aren't socially excluded as well. And so we're talking about building the foundations, a bit more of a joint system. That involves things like data standards, potentially around when we're sharing information, coordinating and co-producing some of those standards, but also thinking about baselining information for everyone. The Digital Exclusion Risk Index is a baseline for people to start from and to think, well, these are the areas that are most digitally excluded. What can we do and what support is there already in those areas? We're also connecting that activity. One of the things we're doing with the system mapping is taking that information and not just like hoarding it for ourselves. I'm certainly not an open data evangelist, but I certainly see value in making data open where there is value in others using it. And we want to make the system mapping work open as well, so that people can add to it over time, but also people can use it and see the resources and support that's available in their area. And finally, we need to do some discovery work around understanding some of those gaps and opportunities for the public sector, the private sector, third sector to get involved and provide that foundational base, those connections between organisations, and to fill those gaps where there's a gap in provision in certain areas. So that's my focus, and I think my asks for this group, if I can, would be to support us with that. Is there anything that you know or you can support us with regards to the places, organisations and projects that are going on around digital inclusion support? And also, please ask us if there's open data or information that we may have or that we might be able to make open that would support you in building new products, new services, delivering better. Let us know, and we're more than happy to kind of take those ideas on, listen and think about what we might be able to do as a city region. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Chris and Bina, for that really comprehensive overview and those clear asks as well for the to the sector. Now I'd like to hand over to John Butt, who will be telling us what they're doing to deliver a world-class digital infrastructure. Oh, I don't know if you're there, John, or if you are frozen or deep in thought. John's
online. I think he might be just having some connection issues, which is always the way, isn't it? Whenever...
Yep, and especially when you're talking about digital infrastructure as well, just to add to the irony.
It's almost inevitable. In fact, it seems to happen to me continually.
Exactly.
What's up with John? Let me see if I can.
Oh, he's back. Hi, John.
Yeah, sorry.
No,
Literally crashed on me just as I was about to put the slides up.
Oh no, always the way, don't worry.
Hopefully it won't kick me out this time.
No, and we can see the slides as well, thank you.
Brilliant. Hopefully it'll last 10 minutes. Yeah, I think it's Patch Tuesday, isn't it? So everything's getting battered. So yeah, John Burt, Lead Enterprise Architect at the Combined Authority. I'm just going to touch on some of the transformation projects and kind of digital infrastructure work that we're doing, linking back to the digital blueprint that was launched. And Phil touched on this, and you know, this really is true across Greater Manchester, where you know the size of an economy that's equivalent to Wales or Scotland, but small enough that we know each other, going back to the ACMA days, and having worked in the region at a local level and now at a region level for the last 20 plus years, you know, that the links between the local authorities, the NHS organisations and the Pan Greater Manchester organisations is really, really strong and really driven, particularly now with Andy taking up the mayoral role and really seeing a lot change over the last 5 or 6 years. And we mentioned the blueprint before, but there's those 5 main pillars, and I'm going to touch particularly on the enabling innovative public services today, and then the underlying digital infrastructure. And there's a lot going on. You know, these are just some of the big projects and programs that are in place, and some of them are very digitally focused, but others, like bus reform or clean air, on the face of it don't look like a digital project, but when you get down into it, particularly the clean air zone is around putting 1,000 ANPR cameras up and then having an online portal for paying fines for driving into the clean air zone. So straight away, that obviously there's a massive political part to that, but there's a big digital part. Some of the things that I particularly wanted to touch on today, so going into the full fibre programme. So this is partially funded by DCMS, but we've also put our own money into this to increase the amount of fibre connectivity across the city region through 3 particular programmes. The main one being the public sector anchor tenancy, which includes 7 local authorities, the Combined Authority, TFGM, touching all 10 local authorities. We've also got a building upgrade project going through the centre of Manchester, and then the co-op infrastructure out in Tameside. But it's around £24 million programmes and looking to deploy a significant amount of new fibre optic in the ground, initially connecting up those public sector sites, but obviously the aim is really for that to be used and contribute to the overall economy of the area. And just from the public sector building, the public sector anchor tenancy programme that we're running with Virgin Media, we've already seen over £12 million of economic benefit in that first year of delivery. You know, and these are really large projects that are happening at the moment. We're kind of about 70% way through them, and really seeing to then build on those in the future. And what we've really seen with the work that we've been doing with Virgin Media, or Virgin Media O2 as they're now known, is really the social value benefits that we've seen through that massive programme have really come through and shown what an exemplar you can actually make embedding social value in a procurement process of this size. Moving on, so we've got a project in flight at the moment, an active procurement on this, so I can't go into too much of the details other than what we've already publicly released. But this is the GM1 network, and this is really looking to build on that full fibre programme and looking to become the public sector network of choice for the city region, starting off initially with 4 of the local authorities, the combined authority and transport for Greater Manchester, to collaboratively build a single active network across the city region for our own use. But we're really seeing this, you know, being a foundational project to allow us to become that digital city, #1 digital city region in Europe. And obviously, you know, you need that sound foundation to be able to drive the further transformation by having a platform which you can build upon. So we're initially looking at around 1,200 sites across the region being connected into GM1. And we've really looked at it from multiple aspects. So we've used the Treasury 5-case model to look at the long-term strategic benefits of this, but the financial case has really been looking at existing spend and that investment that we've made in full fibre. We really see this really as I say, a foundational project around enabling us to become a true smart city region. And not the traditional kind of smart city projects. We're looking much wider than that, with a big focus around data and using data from multiple different sources to really drive that kind of transformation and smart city approach. Moving on from the kind of the GM1 network, what we're currently looking at, and this is really early days and kind of a bit hot off the press, we only kind of did this work over the last few weeks as an initial kind of look at the art of the possible and what the potential is. But building on top of the kind of the fixed connectivity between buildings is now looking at a wireless strategy. And we talk about wireless as advanced wireless as a large topic. It incorporates 5G and looking at macro cells around 5G and in-building 5G capability, Wi-Fi 6, LoRaWAN, but really looking at the whole thing and looking at what investment, and similar to what we did with full fibre, how can we use the public sector as an anchor tenant to drive you know, true innovation, increased investment, etc. And we've obviously got a number of assets as well that we operate ourselves. So kind of looking at it from a use case perspective, there's some great examples, particularly through the pandemic, what Las Vegas did and connected 90,000 school children within a matter of weeks into a private 5G network. And there's a lot of remote care happening around in telehealth at the moment, off the back of not just kind of things like long COVID, but you know, moving the care home back into the home, and really looking at not getting people travelling into hospitals for outpatient appointments. It just it takes hours out of people's day, which has an economic effect. But also, you know, hospitals are expensive places, and you know, provisioning more space in them just for outpatients. Can we look at things differently? A lot going on around transport with kind of smart junctions that we're working on with TFGM. So can we look at all of these use cases and almost build a business case around looking at an integrated advanced wireless capability across the city region, building upon the investments we've already got with obviously a lot of street assets, the full fibre programmes, and also the GM1 network. And the reason for looking at this is what we tend to see with smart city programs, particularly around pilots, is the very vertical solutions. And you're duplicating connectivity requirements again and again. So can we look at this as more of a holistic approach and then kind of bring together a number of different use cases? So as I say, really early days, we first shared this with our Digital Infrastructure Advisory Group, which is made up of industry, just last week, and we're waiting back for feedback from them. But really, you know, from an industry perspective, we're really asking these questions on everyone. You know, there's trials happening both within the UK and wider. But what we really need to see with all of these trials is stepping them on to the next level, where we really look at them are they scalable to a regional basis. One of the other technologies that's been going quite a while now, we first started working on this about 2.5 years ago, and we started deploying last year, is the digital platform. And really that came from a number of two main programs running through the CA and through the Health and Social Care Partnership from an NHS perspective. And we really brought those together because we could see common needs across the system. Again, as with everything, the use case driven. So the primary one from a combined authority perspective is the early years digitisation in health visits and then early years support, and really joining up data between midwifery, early years health visitors, and then into schools to really flow that data right the way through the first 1,000 years of a child's life, which is most important for their developmental needs. But we've also got other use cases around victim support and some smaller things around rheumatoid arthritis. But fundamentally, what the digital platform looked was a component-based architecture that allowed us to join up different organisations and data within an organisation and get towards that kind of utopia of identifying different people, different organisations and requirements right the way through. But rather than a monolithic system, we really took that component approach and looked at things like utilising APIs, low-code platforms, master data management, really to build up technology capability on a cloud platform. And they're not advancing for anyone, they're just be on mute, Phil.
Oh, they seem to be for me.
All right, okay, I'll carry on then. So what we've seen really through, particularly over the pandemic, is that what digital transformation is really looking at is gathering data appropriately, whether that's digitising a paper-based or a low-tech solution like Excel and bringing it into something that's a lot more scalable, or integrating into different systems. The key thing and what we use the digital platform is that kind of secure storage capability, authenticating people, a cloud-first approach, but critically matching data and standardising it across the city region. And then we serve that up, whether it be for secondary use through analytics or further integration back into existing systems. And that kind of leads me on. I am running through this because there's obviously a lot to cover, but the final piece that I just wanted to talk around is something relatively new again, and this is from somebody at ThoughtWorks, Zamak, and she came up with this concept of a data mesh, and it is primarily targeted at data-rich organisations, the likes of Netflix and banks, etc. But we're looking at taking that concept and kind of utilising it for a city region level for between organisations rather than within organisations. And fundamentally what it looks at is turning data into a service. So each organisation needs this kind of capability around data analytics and infrastructure and serving up in a traditional model, and we have it within the digital platform as well. But what we really want to do is to take all these in different organisations and mature their data capabilities, so that we can utilise capabilities we've got at a regional level around identifying, authorising, identifying access to data, but also that master data capability, and create a mesh of data that we allow to share. So we're not moving data around, we're sharing it with the right IG controls and the right access to data. And then utilising metadata in a federated way across the city region, so that we can then all utilise this mesh as a way of improving our data quality and our data maturity. So I think what we're really looking at this, again, it's early days, but we've just run a bid back into central government around supporting families, which is the Old Troubled Families Programme, and really looking at using that as the first use case of this. And I think really, I'll canter through this, but you start to see how all of this builds up into a digital architecture across the city region that allows us really, both as individual organisations, but as a city region, to start developing services, both for our internal users, between organisations, but most importantly, our citizens, as a coordinated approach. So that was very quick, 10 minutes-ish, canter through some of the programmes we've got.
Great, thanks, Sean. And you've got a lot there, so well done for getting through that. Thank you. And with all the tech challenges as well. Great. And then I guess to wrap us up, we've got Phil for what comes next. Phil, I'm just conscious of time. I was wondering if this session, if there's any way as well, we can maybe incorporate some questions or make it interactive based on those asked, if that's okay.
Yeah, if we could do that, that would be great. I mean, let's just roll those things together, Georgina.
Excellent.
Do you want me to? What do you want to do? Do you want to?
If you want to kind of make a start, and then I'll just invite people now, if they have any questions, to start putting them in the chat or raise your hand, and where appropriate, I can bring them in.
That would be great. I mean, you've got a bit of a snapshot of just how much is going on, and there is just a huge amount happening, which is incredibly exciting, and it spans inclusion, the digital inclusion work, all the work around kind of what we call as smart GM places, which is a lot of stuff John's just run through in terms of full fibre and advanced wireless and GM1 network. So there's masses around smart GM places, there's masses around what we bring together in a programme around digital transformations, which is digital enabled reform, a bed every night, early years digitisation, and all that's playing, from an architecture perspective into the mesh. Growth is huge for us. We've got Progress 21, a big event in Greater Manchester next week at a growth hub. If you're not signed up for that, we can bang the link out. But our creative digital tech sector, as I mentioned before, is really booming. So how do we support and grow that? Companies like obviously Hut Group and GCHQ, BBC, AO, Auto Trader. They're just incredibly exciting time. Lots of opportunities, but they've got to be opportunities for everybody, and people feel like those are there. And they're not just city centre jobs, they're for people across the city region. So that inclusive growth piece is massive. Empowering people, we touched on in terms of inclusion, but privacy, information governance at the city region level is a massive focus. And as I've really just touched on already, skills, so each of these has their own programmes, the directions, and they are, and I think, what Bina, Chris and John have really brought to life is how collaborative all that activity is. We do, it is all about working together. And in terms of how we get involved, I was just reflecting on that, because we perhaps need to make it easier. We have a Digital Inclusion Taskforce, which is, I think, about 150 different people now, a GM Cyber Advisory Group, which is about 80, 90, and many of these are private sector and academia and voluntary community. A GM Strategic Advisors Group, which meets 3 times a year, which is a cross-section of industry and others, which helps us stay on the right tracks and provides a challenge and feedback. There's a variety of other things as well, but I know we do, and it is difficult. We do get a lot of correspondence saying, "Can we talk to you about X? Can we talk to you about Y?" And the challenge is, it is a real challenge. And I don't think we've got this right yet. I don't think, and I'd love to know who else has got this. Who else has managed to sort this. And maybe we work more closely with yourselves, Georgina and techUK, and actually bring those together in some sort of more specific forum where we can talk a bit like we've done today, but then put up some specific opportunities and challenges and where we're going and how we can connect better. Because it is incredibly hard to respond to all the individual requests for things, just because we are actually a really small team covering quite a lot of stuff. And I say really small, I mean really small. Covering a huge variety of things, but we're trying to balance that with recognizing that innovation happens outside the public sector. much more than it happens inside. So how do we collaborate with your members, with techUK, to help us think differently? And maybe we need to run more innovation challenges, as was flagged in the local digital capital work by techUK. That's certainly something we need to think about. But I'm not in the business of doing innovation challenges for the sake of just, here's a small pilot that isn't going to scale. There have to be things that scale, and that's one of the things that is one of our watchwords. We're not in the, we don't want to be just testing stuff for testing stuff's sake. It has to be scalable and real, and back off against real challenges we've got. So that's probably a bit about direction of travel and how we're working. But great to have this opportunity today.
Excellent, thanks. Well, you prompted my question was, what can we as techUK do to help and assist that? And we would definitely be up for doing those challenge-led workshops. So any specific problems or outcomes that you are looking to find out what the art of the possible is, we would love to convene that with our members and yourselves. And I think today's proved that it's ultimately about having those constructive conversations, not sales pitches, and we'll be able to provide that mutual forum. And there were also those recommendations in the local digital capital report and index. So great to see that you've read that and flagged that today, and I'm sure we could have a follow-up. But on that, I know Gary Todd previously mentioned some ideas about what that collaboration could look like, especially with SMEs. In these last few minutes we have, I do invite any of our attendees to use the chat function or raise their hand if they've got any other thoughts on what that collaboration could look like, or maybe any best practice they have from one of the other combined authorities or areas, local authorities that they work with. Our members aren't usually this quiet. I'll bring in Gary. Excellent. I'll bring in Gary.
Hi, yes, I just mentioned in the chat briefly that universities use innovation officers as like the contact point for companies to actually say, hey, we're working on this really good thing, we've got grant funding, etc., etc. And they actually connect those people and those companies into the departments, professors, etc., etc. So I think local authorities could do exactly the same. I have to say that it's been a problem for a long time, and there are huge brick walls to particularly micro startups and SMEs, but particularly the smaller businesses that don't have dedicated people to engage at any local authority of any size. So the challenge for us would be to be able to know who the people are to approach, and then to have a reasonable and sensible offer put in front of those people, that they can then take that to the people like on the either front line or in corporate or IT that have the interest. Otherwise, our best route is going in at the executive level, which obviously they haven't got a lot of time either. So that's the challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not, as you say, Gary, it's not a new challenge. And we need to find a more systemic way of addressing it, undoubtedly. There is undoubtedly good practice around this, and we do spend time reflecting on it, and we talked about it from a procurement perspective. We absolutely talk about it from a social value perspective. I don't think we've got there yet on it. So maybe one of the actions from this should actually be specifically to look at how we do something differently, and look at what best practice exists that builds on the work we have in some specific areas. So like we have around Inclusion Taskforce, the Digital Infrastructure Advisory Group, the Strategic Advisors, the Cyber Advisory Group. And these are forums where we come in and share what we're doing and get feedback and look for opportunities to engage better. I think there are other areas where we potentially could apply that more effectively, and that would give a broader opportunity for people both to hear what what we're thinking and what we're planning in our direction of travel, but also for us therefore to have a mechanism to be receptive for ideas and suggestions for what we could do differently, because there's many ways to skin a cat, undoubtedly.
Excellent. And on that, what I can do is invite members, if they do have any thoughts or comments, to email me. I think everyone's got my email, and then I can be that funnel to feed that back to Phil and his team. And yeah, I really do hope, this will be the first of many conversations, not just for, conversation's sake, but something, that could lead to something tangible. And just to say, Phil, and to your team, we are open to, convening those challenge innovation workshops or those forums where hopefully, they will, complement what you're doing, not to, duplicate any existing work. So yeah, hopefully we can take that as an action, and then also through that collaboration, showcase it as some, best practice on what to do well when it comes to procurement and that early market engagement and collaboration. I say with our members and suppliers, but I think you touched on it at the start. We are all ultimately part of that place, and these are, key stakeholders that also need to be engaged, and moving away from that, I guess, that sales added partner to a value added partner, which, I've heard throughout the presentation. So I can't see any other questions or raised hands, but it just leaves me to thank you, Phil, John, Chris, John, Bina. Hopefully I've not missed anyone out, but thank you all for your great insights and those really comprehensive slides. If it's okay with you, I can hopefully share those with the attendees today. And again, if you've got any ask or any additional links you want to share, please send them through to me and I can share that with the attendees today. And as I will be posting it on the techUK blog as well. Just to say, the GMCA team are fantastic, are sharing content and what they're up to with us as well. So please do refer back to the techUK website for any updates too. But yeah, thank you all. Have a great day, and hopefully see you on another call or an in-person or a hybrid of some sort where we'll be discussing next steps.
Thanks so much, Georgina. And again, thanks for the opportunity and thanks for everyone on this. It's great to have the chance to talk a bit about what we're doing. I think we're often so busy getting on with it and trying to keep moving so quickly that we could engage better and talk about a bit more what we're doing, but absolutely look for wider input. So there's definitely something for us to build on here. But thanks again for this opportunity today. Thanks, Georgina.
Great, and a great starting point. Thanks, everyone.